Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. Me and Shelley have taken over the reins while the bosses are on holiday, so be afraid, be very afraid. Tonight we'd like to welcome back Mark Egerton. He's been on before and he was a big hit, so we thought why not get him back for a little bit more of a grilling. So feel free to get your questions in. Thank you very much for coming back on, Mark. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
You're welcome. Yeah, I like talking about the paranormal. I've been dealing with it for a long time. I think it's about 44 years now since
Wow,
I
that's a long time.
my first experience of it. Yeah.
Yeah, you were a young boy.
So yeah, I'm happy to talk. I'm happy to talk about anything that people want. And in 40 odd years, I should have come across most things. And if I haven't, I say I haven't. That's just the way I am. I tell it as it is. In my book, you'll see that there's a lot of cases where every story in the book doesn't come up with a ghost. I say, we had our hopes high and we spent all night here, but nothing really happened. And that's the reality of doing what. It's a bit like fishing. You can go and sit by the riverbank one day and catch loads of fish. You can go back the next day, same place, same time, and you don't get a bite. And that's an analogy that I've often used, the fishing one, because that's very true.
It's the kind of same analogy that we ourselves use, because they relate so much to each other. Now, watching back the live for your last time that you were on, Mark, you was at 15 years old when you first saw the spirit that started your full path.
Yeah, it was in the daytime as well. It was in the middle of a summer's day in the school holidays. It was 1976. I was 15. I'm 60 now, and that remains the only apparition, full body apparition, that I've ever seen. So seeing a ghost, I believe, is quite rare. I think that when you speak to people and they've been on paranormal investigations, and they say, "Oh, it was a fantastic investigation. All sorts went on." If you actually say to them, "Did you see any ghosts?" They say no. What they actually tell you that's happened is what you would term as poltergeist activity, sounds, responding to sounds, or unexplained noises, or things moving. I have witnessed that I'd say probably about 40, 50 times in those 40 years. I've seen things moving, and it's not the case of people think of things like the Enfield haunting that are famous poltergeist cases where you've got chairs and tables flying around the room. That is extreme poltergeist activity, and it's extremely rare. But subtle poltergeist activity, I think, is a lot more common than people think, and very often we tend to put it down. As a friend of mine who is on the council of the Society for Physical Research in London, John Fraser, and he's just written a book called Poltergeist. You can get it on Amazon, and he talks about this, and I concur with him that very often something very slight happens and you just dismiss it as one of those things. If a table or chair comes flying across the room, you tend to memorize it a bit. If you live alone and you put your car keys on the mantelpiece every night and you do that religiously, and then suddenly they're not there and there's nobody else in the house, you then sort of, well, where are they? And they appear a week later on top of your fridge, which you single day since you lost them. We tend to say, oh, I must have moved them to the fridge and I must have not noticed them every time I got the milk out to make a cup of tea or to make my breakfast. So I think that poltergeist activity is a lot more common. But I think it's important to remember that we don't know for certain it's caused by anybody who's died. We could be causing it ourselves with telekinesis.
It's like an energy, isn't it?
Yes. I certainly like that idea. That I think I spoke to Scott last time. The last time really excellent episode I had was in a place called the Peterborough Museum, which was a big old country manor house, and the owner of it was a guy called Thomas Cook. Now Thomas Cook, the holiday firm, do come from Peterborough, but this was not that Thomas Cook. And he gave this house to the city didn't have a hospital, and so he gave the house to them to use as the city's hospital. And it was the city's hospital for about, I think it was either 59 or 69 years, so a long time. And in the old operating theatre from the Victorian times is still there. And we witnessed a small kid's rubber ball do a complete circle, about the size of a, I would say it was about the size of a human head. And it's not rolling down a slope, it did a circle.
Yeah.
We all witnessed it. So it was definitely paranormal. Whether or not it was actually, whether or not it was caused by the spirit of somebody is not known. You have to excuse me for one moment because my cat is trying to get out the door and it can't get out. Just bear with me for 2 seconds.
That's fine. These things happen.
If anybody's got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll get them answered to you in due course.
So, talking about the kind of the ball, that's quite fascinating that it kind of just went round in a circle, because it's no easy to try and like recreate that in any way. A ball's just not going to go around the circle on its own. Do you have any more memorable experiences that you can think of? What would be your most memorable experience while doing investigations?
Well, not doing an investigation, but that first instance when I saw a full-bodied apparition was the only time, and I was 15, and that happened about 2 o'clock on a summer's afternoon. It was in a 16th century farmhouse, and I used to cycle from where I am now, my house, up to my friend's he's a farmer. He was the same age as me at that time. It was his parents' farmhouse, and I parked my bike in this room that they call the washroom, because it was where they used to do their washing years ago when there was no washing machines, and they washed everything by hand. It got a slight slope so that you'd wash at the top room and the dirty then drain away. And I parked my bicycle in there, as I'd done on countless occasions. It was not as bright as outside, but it wasn't by any means dark. And as I went to walk out, it was just like walking into a walk-in freezer, noticeably cold. And I just happened to glance over my right shoulder, and there was a little alcove that contained 2 or 3 old ovens where they baked their own bread. They're all rusty, they hadn't been used for years. And there I saw this monk standing there. To be honest, I couldn't be 100% certain it was a male, but he was dressed as a monk with the hood. He was looking down. I could see a white face. I could see white cropped in front of him. And I sort of looked at it, and probably for 3 to 5 seconds, I was aware I was getting close to the door. So I looked forward to the door. And when I looked back again, it was gone. And I wasn't frightened because it was in daylight and it wasn't thunder and lightning and the things you associate with seeing a ghost. And David, my friend, he said, my nickname is Edge, or Edge. What's the matter, Edge? He didn't say you look like you've seen a ghost. But I told him, and so I said, you're not going to believe this, Dave, but I've just seen a monk in your washroom. And I could tell straight away by his face he wasn't shocked. And he said, the first thing he said to me was, don't tell Chris. Chris was he was about 12. He didn't want to frighten her. And the name of the farm, it's in my book, is called Midlow Grange Farm. Realised the word Grange means monastic. And this farm was actually owned by, not the farmhouse that was there, we're talking long before that. The farmhouse was 16th century. The monks were there around about the 12th century. And there's a very famous abbey in Huntingdonshire called Ramsey Abbey. It no longer exists. It was probably the most second powerfulest. Lincoln was the big place, the big abbey in East Anglia, but Ramsey was very powerful, and they owned this farm, and the monks. It was in a day's walk, so the monks would walk to farm there. And David, to this day, he's the farmer now. He's he's a year younger than me, he's 59, they still dig up the clay pipes that these monks used to smoke in the 12th century. And when he ploughs the fields, he occasionally ploughs them up. And it was tobacco, because tobacco wasn't in this country then. It would have been cannabis, or it would have been opium, which was good. We live in East Anglia, which is the fens. It's the black soil. It's the richest, best growing soil in the country.
Wow. That's fascinating. Just while we've got a wee quiet period here. Hi, Harry. Thanks for joining us. And also to Kathy, thanks very much for coming in tonight. Mark, obviously you've had a vast amount of years where you've been interested in the paranormal, etc. Is there any investigations or locations that stick out to you the most?
Yeah, when I was, one that appears in the book is a place, this Ramsey Abbey that I was speaking to you about. There's now a museum there called Ramsey Rural Museum, and it's actually built in the grounds of the actual abbey. And I've had several experiences there. I would say that there's 55 locations in my book in Huntingdonshire. Huntingdonshire is a fairly small place. It was a county in its own right. In 1974, it became absorbed into Cambridgeshire, so we're now part of Cambridgeshire, now a district as opposed to a real county. But it retained its name because of its historical values. Oliver Cromwell was born in Huntingdonshire. He was actually born a mile from where I was born, in Huntingdon. Catherine of Aragon died 12 miles from where I sit at the moment, a place called Kimbolton Castle, which also features in the book. And the famous diarist Samuel Pepys, he went to the same school as me, Huntingdon Grammar School. And Oliver Cromwell was also educated at that same school, not in the same building, but the building that they were educated in is now the Cromwell Museum. And I spent the night in there in 2015, and that is my favourite story in the book. And the reason it's my favourite story is because they got Oliver Cromwell's big hat, his boots, more Cromwell-owned items than anywhere in the world. So they're priceless. So they wouldn't allow us to spend the night in there without somebody with us. So one of the museum's curators was in there. And so everything we witnessed, he witnessed too. So we had an independent witness who we'd never met before until the night. Very, very nice gentleman called Mike. And everything that we came up with, he said, no, nothing in here like that. So we left really disappointed, thinking that everything we'd got was wrong. And then we got a name, and he told us that he knew Oliver Cromwell really well, particularly well. And he told us what part of the country he came from, told us he was married, told us how many children he got, and most importantly, he said there was something in the museum that belonged to him. His name was John Lambert. And we said to the curator, do you reckon this name? He didn't. And he said, he's telling us there's something in here that belongs to him. No, he said, nothing in here. He said, I'm pretty sure. He said, I've been here 5 years. He said, and I know the museum fairly well. And it's only a small museum. And he said, I think I'd know. So we left fairly disappointed. And he contacted me a week later and said he'd been speaking to one of his colleagues. And John Lambert was actually Cromwell's right-hand general in the English Civil War. Wow. I don't know if you're aware, but Oliver Cromwell suffered badly with depression. He was often 3 months at a time, he couldn't function. And John Lambert took control when he was absent. And this Lambert he told us he came from Yorkshire. And when we checked all this information, everything was spot on. There was one thing that wasn't correct. He told us he had 12 children, and we could only find 11. But he may have had a illegitimate one or a secret lover. These guys were, they were the sort of the top levels of the country in that time. And lo and behold, after the Civil War, they all became politicians. And this John Lambert became a threat to Cromwell. So Cromwell sacked him, and he did it by handwritten letter. And the handwritten letter was in the museum, so there was something in there that belonged to this John Lambert. And he sent me the picture. It's not a fantastic picture, but what he'd taken on his phone of this letter. It was all folded up, probably about the size of a cigarette packet. And he said, I didn't know it was here. He said, one of my colleagues did. It's not a particularly piece of, it just looks like a folded up letter. It's not really interesting. He said, you know, I never get asked about it. I didn't know it was here. But the beauty of that was he was an independent witness, and he was there with me, with us, the team. So that was my favourite. Yeah.
That's actually amazing. Validation.
The Ramsey Rural Museum was the most scary. I'm not particularly scared at paranormal investigations. I've been doing it for too long. But Ramsey Rural Museum, we've got a picture which we think is a ghost. But we've got a picture with the lights on. And 30 minutes later, we took a picture with the lights off. And to be fair, it's not great in the book. But if you look at it on a PC, you can really see it. And I mean, I know about pareidolia now. You can imagine, you can see something that isn't really there. The clouds in the sky, you can see a horse or something like that. This, when you see the photo with the lights on, there is nothing there what could possibly make this human form, and you could feel it. The place was really, it was noticeably colder. The thing that most saw, one of the ladies who was with me, she's mentioned in the book, her name's Melanie Arnold, we call her Mel. She's quite psychically gifted, and she became quite, I'd never seen her react like this at an investigation. I've known her for 10 years, and she said, Mark, you've got to get me out of here now. I mean it now, Mark, now. I must go now. She was very scared. I'd never seen that in her. She's very experienced. I have a team of there's about 15 of us. Not on an average investigation, there's probably between 8 and 12 of us that do investigations. I think that's about the right number. You go on a lot of these corporate or public commercial ghost hunts, and you've got 50 people with some of them no experience at all. It's very difficult to do a controlled investigation. So
I actually agree.
Yeah, that was probably the scariest in recent years. I've had one or two funny ones. One of them is written in my book. There's a place called St Ives, and there's an old bridge on there. It goes back to Cromwell's days. And St Ives was actually, although we were about 60 miles from the east coast, it was a river port. Boats would come into what they call the Wash in East Anglia, and they'd sail up the River Ouse. And when they got to St Ives, they couldn't get any further. And what they generally bought for trade was clothing. Their cloth was vastly superior to that of England. So people, including royalty, would travel to St Ives to buy this cloth because it was so superior. And the bridge there is very, very old, and it's got a chapel on it. The chapel now is only 1 story high, but it was 3 stories high at one stage. And in my very early days, I think it was about 1981, when I was 20, I spent a night on the bridge, because there were stories that the chapel was haunted. There were stories that the bridge was haunted. The bridge often, because the river below it, if it got misty, the mist rolls over the top of the bridge, and people had seen figures in the mist. So people had reported hearing monastic chanting coming from the chapel, and that was one of the very first investigations I did. And I've been told different stories. Before the bridge was there, people used to cross on foot. There was no bridges, so they had to cross the river with their animals to take them to market. And in the winter, when the river was in flood, people couldn't swim. A lot of lives were lost there. And so people said that you could hear these screams coming from the river of people who drowned. And I was on the bridge doing a lone investigation about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I started hearing these screams, and they were indeed coming from the river, not from the bridge. So I was a bit frightened.
Wow.
And I sort of just peeked over the edge of the bridge, sort of expecting something to grab me and pull me in. And what it was a load of ducks and wildfowl, and they were having a fight underneath the bridge, and they were
Oh my
squawking.
God.
So under the bridge, it made it echo, and it sounded like human voices. So I would think that story, what people had told, was true, and they'd come out the pub drunk, and they thought they heard voices from the river, but they were actually the waterfowl that they were screeching and fighting. And of course, it was echoing under the bridge. It was really spooky, but I was able to debunk that.
I bet you're glad you were able to debunk it, because that would have been quite scary if you hadn't worked out what it actually was.
Yes,
can imagine.
Yeah, that was probably the scariest investigation I'd done. I remember my first investigation because my uncle was in the Ghost Club, and his cousin Peter Underwood was the chairman and the president of the Ghost Club for 32 years. So I desperately wanted to be in the Ghost Club, but I wasn't Cambridge or Oxford educated. I wasn't 18. I wasn't a celebrity, so there was no chance I was going to get an invite. But my uncle would allow me to do some research. So I did my first investigation in March 1979, a place called the Ferryboat Inn. And it's a very famous Huntingdonshire ghost story. And when I wrote my book and researched it properly, I've actually debunked the story and given good reasons as to why. It's an anniversary haunting. It happens supposedly on St. Patrick's Day, and it's supposed to be about a ghost of a lady called Juliet Tuesley, young girl, 18. She fell in love with a woodcutter called Tom Zool, and basically showed that she had feelings for him, and he just sort of scorned her. And she's said to have then, in such distress because he's scorned her and dismissed her, she took herself to the edge of the River Ouse and hanged herself from a tree. And because she'd taken her own life, we're talking 12th century for this, she'd actually wasn't allowed to be buried on consecrated ground. And therefore, she was buried by the side of the river, where they later built this pub. And on the anniversary of her death, she's supposed to rise up from the grave, which is actually in the pub, and walk about 50 yards to the river, always on the 17th of March. Now, I must have been there 15, 20 times in the last years. And when I did the research for the book, all these names, Juliet Tuesley and Thomas Zool, from a seance held there in 1952 by a very famous parapsychologist from Cambridge called Tony Cornell. He's dead now. He's got a number of books which he wrote. Poltergeists was his particular speciality. He wrote a lot of books with a guy called Alan Gould on the subject of poltergeists, and all this had been picked up at a seance. And seances are renowned for unreliability. So yes, I 15 years, he debunked it. I got in my book, there's the actual transcript of this seance and everything that was said. It's in there just exactly as it was. And it's one of Huntingdonshire's oldest ghost stories, but I debunked it in the book. And that was based on Tony Cornell's findings, his seance before I was even born, and my own findings from going there. Anniversary haunting every 16th of March. Go to the Ferryboat Inn, see if we can see Juliet. Never did see her. Never found anyone who had. So, pubs and hotels are notorious for stories, because a ghost story attracts custom. And so I've been an interviewed landlord. I've interviewed landlords who say, on Fridays, Oliver Cromwell drops in on Fridays. He has a pint, and then on Saturdays, we get Catherine of Aragon. And I think, mate, what world are you living in? I've been doing this 40 odd years, seeing one apparition, and you're telling me they're visiting you for a pint. These national figures that, a lot of them you have to take with a pinch of salt. And I've got very good. My uncle interviewed me about my experience. I've got used to interviewing people about their experiences, and some of them are just either the people are not well mentally, or they're imagining these things, or, in my opinion, You do get some psychic mediums that say that they can see spirit, and I've got no reason to doubt them. They probably can, but to me, if I can't see some evidence that I've got a spirit voice standing next to me, then it's inconclusive. So I dismiss it as inconclusive, and that's how you've got to be. Peter Underwood, one of the things he taught me was not to prove that something is paranormal, prove that it isn't. And then in true Sherlock Holmes form, as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a Ghost Club member, what you have when you've dismissed everything else is probably the truth, what you have left at the end. And so that's the way I approach an investigation.
Yeah.
When something happens, you have to stand back and say, right, what sort of rational explanation can I find for this? And so, you know, when you see people on Facebook broadcasting live investigations and their REM pod is flashing away, they're transmitting live. That REM pod has got an electronic receiver in it. That could be picking up a signal from the taxi cab going by. It could be picking up somebody getting a text. So unless you're using electronic devices and you're consistently getting answers on demand for at least a minute, I think anything that comes up you have to treat as, you know, possibly debunk it, really. I have had an instance with an EMF meter in a place called Moot Hall in Bedfordshire, where there's supposed to be a spirit of a young boy near the reception, and I was asking him to light up the EMF meter on demand, and we did that for a period of 4 minutes. And when I do that sort of interaction, I call it a wobbly one. I will throw in something, a question that sounds completely stupid. I might have established from asking questions, because you're dowsing, really, like you dowse with rods, you dowse with a crystal, you can dowse with a glass on a table. You can only ask questions that solicit a yes or a no answer. So, you know, if you say what time did you go to bed at night, you're not going to get a response. If you say, did you go to bed at night between 7 and 9, and they say yes, then you can say, was it between 7 and 8, and you get no, and you know they went to bed between 8 and 9, so you can clarify that. So you can say, are you a male spirit? That's a yes or no question. And, you know, I'll establish that something's a male spirit, and then sort of five minutes through what's ever happening, I'll say, so you're a female, is that correct? Just to see whether I've had what I call tricksters, sort of some communication, which I believe is paranormal, and whoever it is, if it is spirit, then they're playing with you, and, you know, they're having a joke, really. And I call them a trickster. I'll say, are you a trickster? You're telling me the truth. You told me a minute ago that you was a male. Now you're telling me you're a female. Are you a male? And, you know, you've got a yes or no answer. I don't use a Ouija board as such. I use a pack of cards that I've got letters on, A, B, C, D, E, a yes and a no card, and letters. And I'll normally, my preferred way of dowsing is to use a glass. And, you know, as in with the seance and the Ouija board, put your finger on the glass, ask for spirit to come for you, use your energy, and I will just, if the glass starts to move on its own, I will then put a yes and a no card down. And if it's really going well, I will then put the letters around and we can start spelling out names.
Yep.
Now, the beauty of that, you hear a lot of stories about Ouija boards, horror stories, is if you use a Ouija board and you get something nasty, I was taught that if you get anything nasty, the thing to do is dismiss it. Tell it it's not welcome. It must go away. You don't want anything to do with it, and you get up and you leave. Now, if you've got a Ouija board open and you pick that up and you close it, you close the board, but the circle remains. If you've got playing cards like I do, I can just shuffle them out, and that, in theory, breaks the circle. And that was what I was taught by my uncle, Trevor Kenwood. So I think I showed Scott last time. It looks like it's just a pack of playing cards, but it's all the letters. And that's, you know, I haven't seen anybody else who uses that method, but my uncle Trevor did, and so I do the same. I should really patent those cards and get them out there for sale. on
That's a good
in the
idea, actually.
Yeah.
It was
I'll call
just
them
the one
instead of
thing when you're,
yeah, I'll call them edgy cards instead of tarot or whatever.
yeah.
I've been using that method, and if the glass, I went to a place on the Welsh English border, a place called St Breville's Castle. I don't know. It's very well known. It looks like something out of a Harry Potter film, and it's a youth hostel. It's a working youth hostel, so you can only go there in the really bleak winter months, December, January, when nobody's using it, and they will actually leave you in there for the night. They'll lock up and say, right, we'll be back in the morning at 8 o'clock. And yeah, I took my son with me, who's a complete skeptic, and we were dowsing with the glass, and the glass was going everywhere. And he said, Dad, I can't believe this. Now, some people say that the movement of the glass is caused by something called the ideomotor effect, and that's slight tremors in all our arms. We've all got minor electrical pulses which we don't even feel. And so if 3 or 4 of us put our hands on the glass, we can generate enough movement for the glass to start moving. Now, I don't buy into that, and the reason I don't buy into that is because sometimes the glass doesn't move at all. And if that was the case, that they were small impulses. Every time 4 or 5 people put their fingers on the glass, these are such minute electrode movements that we wouldn't feel them. The glass would have to move every time. It doesn't. And so when the glass moves, sometimes it's a really slow movement. Other times it's literally going round really fast. So, or I've had 2 instances where a glass has flown off the table. We've had our fingers on it and it's literally flown off. So, again, this could be our telekinetic energy, and we're doing that ourselves without realizing we're doing it. Or it could be the spirit, soul, ghost, whatever you want to call it, of somebody that's long dead and has expired. So,
Kathy's saying here, Mark, that one of her ancestors was let out of the Tower of London by Cromwell, and she would like to connect with her ancestors. Do you have any suggestions?
yeah, I think that I mean, I have a lady that I went for a reading, something that I was very skeptical about. I first had a reading when I was about 18, and it was with a pack of cards. And I'll be honest with you, I thought it was a load of old tosh. And I was at an investigation in a place called Royston, which is not too far from here. And we picked up a spirit that was communicating with us through an EMF meter. And we couldn't get a name. All we could ascertain was that she was a female and that she was something to do with typing. So we called her the female typist for want of a label. We couldn't find a name for her. We sort of went through, does your name begin with A, B, C, D, E? No. Does it begin with F, G, H, I? No. Went through the whole alphabet, nothing. Couldn't get anything. So we later sort of realised that this spirit seemed to be attached to me. And they said, do you know anybody at Royston who this could be? Any ideas? Lady typist? Nope. Didn't think about it. Got home about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm always wide awake when I've done an investigation. It just wakes me up, and I'm laying in bed and I'm thinking, Mum worked at RAF Brampton as a civil servant. She was a superintendent of typists. This was in 2015 this happened. She passed away in 2010. Could it have been my mum? And that hadn't even occurred to me on the investigation, I think because I was 20 miles from my home. And so I was speaking to one of my colleagues, Kate Dimmock, who's very gifted with a crystal pendulum at dowsing. And she said, you should go and have a reading. And I'm not having a reading. I had one then when I was 18. You know, how can I believe it? So I went and had this reading, this lady. Her name was June. And I had a reading with June this week, just gone, on Monday. And this was January 2015, and she told me some amazing things. She says, I've got a lady with me, I'm sure it's your mother. And she went through these things which she couldn't have possibly known. She said, I see you writing with you. It's something to do with a book, not Kindle, he said, a proper book. your mum's telling me you should continue with that. It will do well. People will enjoy it. Continue with it. She said, the most distinguishing thing about your mother is her hands. She says she's holding her hands in front of me, and they're like that. They're like a bird's claws. Now, my mother was crippled with arthritis in the last few years of her life, and her hands were indeed like that. And she said, I'm getting chest problems as well, pneumonia. She said, did your mum suffer from pneumonia? I said, it's what killed her. I said, she went into hospital for alcohol related. When my dad died, she started drinking. And she was in hospital for her alcohol related problems with her liver. While she was in there, she caught pneumonia and she died. So with all due respect, that's a lot of coincidences to come up with.
Yeah.
Writing a book. At that time, the book was just a seed in my mind. I'd made a promise to my uncle Trevor. His wife was my mum's sister. They didn't have any children. So Marilyn died of cancer in 2009, and she'd been badgering me to write this book for 15, 20 years. In the last few months of her life, I said to her, because I've written poetry before and had it published, but never written a book. She said, you know so much about Huntingdonshire's ghosts. You must write a book. You must. And I just didn't have a time. I got 2 children. I was working full time. And I sort of promised her that one day I would. I didn't set a time scale to it. And that's why I wrote the book, really, because I'd made a promise to my dying aunt. And I hoped it would sell 300 copies. And it's sort of nearly 7,000 now. And it's not a cheap book. It's a huge book. It costs 25 quid because it's got 300 colour photos in it. I tried to write it so as you read the book, you can actually see the places that I'm talking about. And I just think with normal books, all the pictures are in the centre. And there's a reason for that. I mean, I didn't know this because I'm not a writer, but the books with the pictures have to be printed on high quality paper, so those high quality pages are all in the middle and all the pictures. The rest of it is written on the writing, fairly low quality paper. Now that wouldn't work with my book because I wanted the people to read it and be able to see what they were reading. So the whole book has to be this high quality paper. You'll know for yourself from buying computer ink that printing in colour is expensive. So I would have liked a hardback cover on it, but that was going to push the book beyond 30 quid. And I just thought, I've never written a book before. Nobody's going to pay 30 quid to read what I've written. So
you never know. You've sold 7,000 copies already.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I've just started writing another book, but it's not paranormal. It's football related. My dad was he's a Scouser, so we've all got football in our blood. So we've got a family of Liverpool fans. So and my family's been involved with the club since the 3rd of June 1892, which is when Liverpool were formed. Most of my family buried in Anfield Cemetery. So we've got a lot of history that goes right back to the club being formed, because Everton Football Club used to play at Anfield where Liverpool play, and there was a dispute with the owner, John Holding, and as a result Everton moved a quarter of a mile across Stanley Park to Goodison Park where they play now, and Holding suddenly had a ground and all the amenities but no team, so he formed Liverpool Football Club. And my great grandfather Christopher Egerton was a friend of his and was there when the club was formed. So the Egertons have been following Liverpool from day one. So I'm going to write that story. Yeah.
Good. Not
paranormal.
Obviously. No, it's not paranormal, but it's a passion.
Yeah.
I see the boss man made a slight appearance. I thought we were getting some paranormal activity when Scott popped up on the screen there. He clearly can't stay away from us for too long, but he's went away again because nobody spoke to him.
Was that Scott?
Yes, it was.
I did see Scott appear on the screen. Yeah.
We all just ignored him there, and he's decided to pop back off into his tent.
Well, if you're going to post pictures on the screen, I'll have to put my glasses on. I'm 60 now. I need glasses to read. My long distance vision's good, but my
He
short
actually
term.
popped up on the live there. He popped up on the
right.
live, but then I spoke to him, so he's popped back off.
Sorry, Scott. You're on holiday. Have a rest.
Getting back to your question about ancestors, I think just call out and try. If you've got something that belonged to them, I think that there is definitely evidence of belongings create personal impression. I don't know if you're familiar with something called the stone tape theory.
It's like a replay.
Yes, yeah. Well, the stone tape is stone being the fabric of a building, the walls, and tape, as in a tape, replaying back. And when we leave this world, our spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it, is not something that's physical, like our heart, our lungs, and things like that. So where does it go? We're taught that it goes to heaven or hell. Religion teaches us that, but it is possible that some of that spirit be absorbed in the fabric of a building, and then when the conditions are right, it could replay itself. So that's just one possible number of explanations for what we perceive to be ghosts. And when it does replay, it'll always be exactly the same. He's back. Hi, Scott.
The signal here is crap. My signal went, so I had to go into the Wi-Fi in the car. So I'm using the car's Wi-Fi now because the signal is pants. How are we, folks? Yeah. Evening, Mark. Always a pleasure to see you. I thought I'd jump on for 5 minutes. To provide some eye candy since I'm not on the panel tonight,
I definitely fancy you, Scott.
I've had it must be the hair that does it. I get told today that I don't have a hairline and I've got they can't tell where my forehead starts or ends. It just continuous. But such is life. I might not have any hair, but I've still got my looks, as my gran used to tell me. God bless her wee bum. She's gone upstairs. How are we, folks?
Yep, good.
Yeah, we're having a very interesting evening, Scott.
Good. Are they looking after you, Mark?
They're looking after me very well. No offence, Scott, but I'd rather be looked after by two women than you. And that's no offence to your looks.
Yeah.
Look, he's looking away now.
Say that,
offended.
If you have me on your show regularly, you'll find that I have a very warped sense of humour, and it sometimes gets me into trouble. If people don't know me,
after that remark, I'm going to have to rethink that one, Mark. Since you prefer the last. I'll start again. It's been a long day today. Been out all day. No. And my teeth are in. See, teeth are in.
Yeah.
We're waiting a thunderstorm coming.
Oh dear.
We're waiting on a thunderstorm turning up. Maybe a thunderstorm tonight. There's a big dirty grey cloud right up above this car, and I'm just waiting on it tipping down on us. I mean, the kind of weather you want to be in a tent. Sod your caravan. We'll go in a tent.
I'll be sleeping in the car.
I was just
in the car. You've got rubber tyres.
Yeah, that's right.
Last night it rained constantly, and about 4 o'clock this morning, I was lying listening to it, thinking, Travel Lodge or Premier Inn.
Yeah.
Your blow-up beds will save you. Stay on the blow-up beds, you'll be fine.
You'll float.
Well, thanks for that advice, ladies. That's really going to save my backside, just as well. This is a non-swearing channel. I'll tell you that now. But it's been really good. We were in Whitby today, and Scarborough, and I was going to say Felix. It's no Felix. Filey. Felix, I'm in the right place.
Did you go to the Abbey? Did you go to the Abbey?
Up to the Abbey, yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story about Whitby. I've got a very funny story about Whitby Abbey. I did an investigation there in about 1990, and I was with a friend, and we decided that we would leave a video recorder recording up there for 2 hours, and then we would go and fetch it. We basically decided we'd set the video recorder running, go to the pub, have some food, have 2 or 3 pints, and then come. He got talking to some local people, because obviously that was where Count Dracula was inspired. The Dracula story. Did you go up the steps, Scott, that go up to the Abbey, the really steep steps? Yeah. Well, that's where supposedly Bram Stoker was inspired for Dracula. And if you've read the Dracula book, you'll see much of Whitby in his descriptions of places, including those steep steps. And he transforms in the Dracula into a dog, I think, and runs down those steps. And that's supposed to be based on those steps of Whitby. Well, anyway, this guy who I was with, we were timed to go and collect the camera, and he got talking football. So I went up to the Abbey by myself and collected this camera. It was quite a cold evening, and it was quite misty. And I was coming back. I was desperate to go to the loo. And I'm thinking, I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to have a wee behind a bush or something. And I turned round, and there was this spectre. It was about 2 meters above my head, and it really frightened me. It was a barn owl. Now, if you've been on an investigation, I have had it happen to me since. They fly silently. Their wings don't make noise.
They do.
They've got a big round face. And they're underneath the white, so they reflect. So I'm sort of standing there having a wee, and I look round, and there's this thing coming at me, and I'm thinking Dracula and everything else, and I was scared. And as it flew away in the distance, I suddenly gathered my senses that I've got some quite funny stories that have happened, investigations where I've debunked things, but at the time I believed that they were possibly paranormal, and it was only with the benefit of sitting back, really thinking about it and digesting it. This is why I think if you're an experienced paranormal investigator, you tend to do that. If you're a complete novice and something like that owl happened, you would scream, run, and tell everybody that you'd seen a ghost, where in fact all you'd seen was a nocturnal bird.
That actually happened to us with a pheasant, Shelley, didn't it?
Yeah,
it was a pheasant.
Yeah. I tend to be honest, I very rarely do investigations outside, because there are so many things like the elements and wildlife that you can't eliminate. You've got contamination. So, if you hear a rustling in that bush and you call out and it is an animal, it will hear your voice. My voice is quite deep. And, it will probably startle it and it will move again. So you think, oh, it's communicating with me. And all it is an animal thinking, what the hell's that? There's not normally that sort of sound here. I'm hunting and there's this manly voice. And what you've actually got is nothing paranormal at all.
That's right.
All you've got is an animal. And that's why if you do an investigation, I mean, ideally, I want a small team of probably 6 people. Depends on the size of the property. When we go to Hinchinbrook, Scott, you'll see that Hinchinbrook House is a huge house. You couldn't do that with 6 people. No, you couldn't cover the whole house in one evening. When I filmed the episode of Paranormal Lockdown with Nick Groff and Katrina Weidman, they just wanted me to come in and talk about the history of the house, which I'd researched for my book, and then tell them about the haunted history, which on the front cover of my book there's this white lady that glows, and she's it's been seen a number of times. Nobody knows who she is. So I decided that I would research the house right as far back as I could. Went back to 1170 when it was a dilapidated wood church. And I also investigated all the residents that I knew that lived in Hinchinbrook over an 800-year period. and tried to see if I could find any of them that this white lady, she's got some things very significant about her. She's extremely attractive. She seems to be very upset, almost crying. But the most distinguishing thing about her, as you'll see on the book's cover, you may think it's not a very good picture of the ghost, but she radiates light. She sort of glows, fluoresces. Mm-hmm. So people, one really good witness account came in 1959, where this guy described her as like a woman who had a spotlight behind her. So sort of light was out radiating from behind her. And that's how he described it. But other people have said that she just sort of glows and radiates light, which is what I've written in the book. But nobody knows who she is. So I thought, well, if I could go back all that time, it took me a month to do the research, intensive. I never found anything conclusive, but I've had a stab at who it might be, which is in the book. The house started off as a dilapidated wooden church, and a nearby priory, a place called Eltersley, wanted to build a larger priory, so they asked for permission to change this wooden church, which was falling down, into a priory. So a priory was established there in 1170, so late 12th century. Now that priory remained there until Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries in 1536. He basically wanted a divorce from Catherine of Aragon, and the Pope wouldn't give him one. So he said, look, I'm the king, this Catholic religion, I'll do away with it, and I'll start my own, the Church of England, and I'll be the boss. So I'll decide who has a divorce and who doesn't. And that's what he did. So all these wonderful, priories and that, they all became prime real estate because they weren't religious buildings anymore. So they were basically these houses you see, you'll find that many of them were former priories, abbeys and places like that. And Hinchinbrook is no different. So the back, what you call the back of the house, was basically an old priory. And there are, Scott, when you go there, I'll show you, there are a few features of the original priory that you can still see that date back to 1170. And the house has evolved. And Henry VIII sold the priory to the Cromwell family. And the Cromwells were there for about 3 or 4 generations. And they, when King James of Scotland took the British crown and he travelled down from Edinburgh to London to collect the crown, he stopped at Hinchinbrook, and he loved the hunting so much. He returned very frequently, so much so that the Cromwells, trying to lavish him with, entertainment and things like that, they went bankrupt and ran out of money. And that was all King James's fault. You see, you Scots, you won't pay for nothing. So they lavished all his money from him. King James wanted this, King James wanted that, and the Cromwells ran out of money. And King James was a frequent visitor to Hinchinbrook.
I'm paying for more fuel he can do anyway, so I'm paying for more fuel he can do.
I'm charging you Premier rate.
I'm going to leave his folks.
Okay, boss man.
But Mark, I'll drop you a video call when we're back. We're coming back next Tuesday. We're off to Pendo on Friday for 4 or 5 days, and then we're back up the road. But I'm going to go and get the wee one to bed because we're either going to the caverns tomorrow or we're going into Harrogate to meet a couple of people. But I just thought I'd jump on and say hello. I can't see any of the comments, so if anybody in the comments has said hello, I'm not ignoring you. I don't know, I can't see them.
No, then nobody's talking to you.
No.
Nobody's talking to me. That's fair. I can't afford the comments because, I'm Scottish. As Mark says, we don't pay for sod all.
£17.43.
17.43, you got the comments that you want, doll. Anyway, I'm going to get the wee one to bed. So enjoy your night, ladies. Mark, always a pleasure, buddy. I'll drop you a wee vid call when I get back. All right, folks.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care. Everybody chat. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Just can't stay away.
No. He told you he's coming down to see me.
Yeah.
He's coming down here in September. I'm doing some 4 tours of Hinchinbrook House, taking 30 people inside there. I'm going to cover the paranormal lockdown program. I'm going to cover some of the history I just told you about the King James. King James stayed there more than any monarch, but Elizabeth I stayed there. Charles I stayed there. Hinchinbrook has got a lot of history. The man who invented the sandwich stayed there. Yeah.
I remember that from the last conversation.
Yes. Yeah, it's very interesting. John Montague, he was a character because he's the guy who sponsored all of Captain James Cook's voyages. So the Hawaiian Islands were actually called the Sandwich Islands originally because the Montagues, after about 60 years of living at Hinchinbrook, they were given the titles the Earls of Sandwich. Sandwich in Kent is a place. So they got the title the Earls of Sandwich. So Montague was a gambler, and he sat at the gambling table for 24 hours and wouldn't leave it. And they said, "Oh, you must eat." So he said, "Bring me meat between 2 slices of bread," and that supposedly is where the sandwich came from. He was John Montague, the 4th Earl of Sandwich.
Just shows you how people get.
He also put his wife in a loony bin so that he could marry her, or he didn't marry her, but took a younger mistress, a lady called Martha Ray, who she was the person that I think is that white lady on the front of the book. She was murdered on the steps of the Garden Opera House. Homer came back to bite him. He had 5 children by this Martha Ray. She was about 25 years younger than him. And to get her into Hinchinbrook, he put his wife, I think her name was Dorothy. She was called the Countess of Sandwich. Dorothy Vane was her maiden name. Into a very nice lunatic asylum at Windsor, near Windsor Castle, and then moved his young mistress in to Hinchinbrook, where she had 5 children by him.
Wow.
So yeah, he's a sort of Jekyll and Hyde character. He did some wonderful things like sponsored James Cook's voyages around the world. He was very into politics and did a lot of very good things, but he was also a member of the Hellfire Club. I think you've got one of them up in Scotland. You did have.
Yeah.
There's one in Dublin as well, I think. But the main one was in the caves of West Wickham in Buckinghamshire. And it was basically a club underground for the rich and the people who act prim and proper to go and drink, have sex, take drugs, and do all the things that they didn't want people above ground to see. And Montague was a member of the Hellfire Club. It was really rich men basically letting their hair down and going mad, having lots of women, lots of booze, lots of drugs, and he was involved with that.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah. See, the history, when I did the research for the book of the ghosts,
to do that, new people.
Yeah, I mean, this goes on today, with you do it now in the news about Hancock at the moment. He's had an affair, big news. That human beings have been doing that for centuries, and if you're one of the elite people, you just do it very discreetly. If you're Prince Andrew or someone, you get caught occasionally, but it's not new. It's been going on for centuries and centuries.
Of course it has. Yeah. Okay.
Get men and women and add a bit of alcohol, and you've got problems.
That's it. Well, I think we'll leave it there, so we have people wanting more. If that's all right with yourself.
Yes, that's fine. Yes.
And it's a pleasure once again.
Mark.
Yes, very nice to talk to you. Hopefully I'll get up to Scotland and meet you one day. Scott says that I can come up.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
Show me
that would be good.
It's going to show me the cemetery at Edinburgh. So
that's a must.
I haven't been with local people. I want to be there with local people who know the area, because you can't beat local knowledge.
It's amazing. But congratulations again on the sales on your book, and hopefully they continue to rise.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it's a pleasure. If I could just hold on for you for a little minute once I've ended, Mark, that would be great.
Okay.
And thank you to anybody that's joined on the chat. It's been really good. I've had some people from Los Angeles and where else was it? I seen
Vegas.
Vegas. I'd lost it there, seen it, and then I lost it. So thanks for everybody that joined in the chat, and hopefully the next time Mark comes on, you can join us again, and like me, you'll still have loads of questions to ask him.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.